Hello. Let's get this thing started. All right. It's me today. No guests, no co host, just us talking about agent harnesses. All right. How's everyone doing? I am triple streaming today to Instagram and then twice on YouTube. So if you're watching on YouTube and you're seeing this in either the wide or the vertical format that you didn't like, just go back to my channel, click on my face at the bottom, and you can switch. That's a new feature in YouTube now. You can switch between vertical and horizontal formats on a live stream, and I can stream both at the same time to YouTube. Although my machine is sweating. It's sweating right now. I'm trying to keep up with all this. So we'll see if this works. Maybe it works. Yeah. I don't know. I'm not sure if this is going to be a good idea, but we're going to give it a shot. And today, I'm going to record some videos while we're here. I've got 2 or 3 topics to go through, and we'll see how far I get. All right. On the first topic is sandboxes. And let's talk about it. All right. I'm going to pull up some websites, actually. No. Docker sandbox. Let's bring that up. What else are we going to do? Maybe OpenShell? I haven't actually tried OpenShell yet. So we're going to look into NVIDIA OpenShell. And I've used, let's see, I've used this one. I've used no before. And I've used Docker sandboxes, Docker containers. But I haven't used OpenShell. Yes, I am live. Welcome. There's also veto. Let's bring up that. And then, what else do we need? I think we're going to talk through, I think we need a diagram. We need this diagram, sandboxes. Let's bring up, do we have sandboxes up here? Maybe this is a different, oh, here we go. Yeah, what are these agent sandboxes? So sandboxing simply means we're taking primarily agent harnesses. So the Cloud Code, Codex, Copilot, Open Code, Pi, anything that you've got this local GUI, primarily the TUIs, the terminal user interfaces, those have, we have a number of sandboxing abilities. And when it comes to agent harnesses, sandboxes means restricting local file access, local network access of your agent from some external or some feature that is outside of the agent's control. So if you're worried about Claude Code installing something on your machine without your permission, but you'd also like to go full no permissions mode or YOLO mode, where you just want to let the agent run, but you're not really confident that it would clean up after itself on your machine. I just had an agent last night creating a bunch of videos while testing a new tool I was creating, and it was adding a bunch of files and videos to my temp and not always cleaning up everything when it should. So if you want to keep all that sandboxed, you need a sandbox tool. And there's now an increasing number of them. Docker is probably got the most options because we're all used to containers, and Docker has something new called Docker Sandboxes, which is technically their third time doing sandboxes, possibly fourth, but third time, let's just say. And they have a relatively new tool that you can download separate from Docker. It does not require you to have Docker Desktop installed. And we're going to compare it to other options, including native features in harnesses like Claude Code and Copilot and Codex and Cursor. And then compare that to third-party tools like ohno or openshell or this new one veto that I haven't tried. And so I'm trying to describe these as there's really 4 buckets for sandboxing, 4 different types of isolation to put our agent harnesses in. So I'm gonna start this in a minute. Let me get my stuff organized here. And I don't have everything actually installed, so we'll make that a part of this. Hello, Mr. Twinkletoes. All right. What is an agent sandbox? We've had sandboxing technology for decades, ever since the idea of virtual machines, or even before that, if we talk about chroot and zones and Solaris, we've had isolation technologies. And of course, I am the Docker guy. So Docker containers is my go-to and still is. But in the world of Claude Code and agent harnesses on our machine, particularly the ones that we run in our shell, the TUIs, we have this concept now of sandboxing, which is generally a good idea. If you are a developer, I feel like sandboxing might be considered optional for you. But if you are in platform engineering, infrastructure management, DevOps, SRE roles, if you're someone who has keys to the kingdom, meaning your infrastructure, you need to protect yourself. Like if the agent suddenly decides to do something with the GitHub command line tool or your AWS command line tool or your Terraform, and you have access on your machine, anytime you run Claude Code or any of the other agent harnesses, by default, pretty much every one of them, except for maybe things like Cowork, which is not technically, I wouldn't call that a developer first experience. Cowork is maybe more for non-technical roles. But all these other harnesses that we're all using, OpenCode, Pi, OpenClaw, you name it, these tools all just run essentially with your permissions on your host machine. So you have maybe a potential problem that you're not aware of, but if you start to think more about it and you start to realize that, Claude Code could just run a Terraform command if it thinks it's appropriate, or delete your /bin, or delete something on your computer with root permissions without you really being aware of it, you need to lock that stuff down. And that's where sandboxing technologies come into play. And there's really 4 major types that we're dealing with here. The market, I would say, is pretty immature. Like we're still at the beginning phases of figuring this stuff out, but we've got at least 4 types of options. I'm going to start here over on the left. This is probably the most native experience, I'm calling it. And we lean into other things that use your host kernel, maybe on Linux, or particularly on Linux and Mac, where you see a lot of these where they're using the kernel to lock down the app where your agent is running. And then we can move over to the right into more traditional tools like containers or traditional VMs. And then we have some new things like Docker's sandboxing, or just Docker sandboxes. This is the SBX command line tool that is relatively new. It's months old. And that is, I would say, a standalone technology that is not dependent necessarily on the host operating system's kernel sandboxing. It just installs a mini VM on your machine and runs everything inside there so that you have a full-fledged environment for your agent. And one of the benefits of using all this isn't just the security of protecting your system or your network from the agent accessing things it shouldn't, but the other real advantage here is that it's not the cleanup. What was the other advantage I was going to give it? Already I lost my train of thought. Oh, the other big advantage here, is that you can give it YOLO mode access. Essentially, you can give the agent the ability to run without asking for permissions, because since it's in its isolated environment, you can feel more confident that when it installs a tool, it's just in that sandbox environment. If it needs to access files, it's going to be able to only access files in that sandbox environment. Some of these tools come with networking lockdown, where you can control individual URLs, DNS, IP addresses, different subnets that you want to limit its access to, maybe. And you can sort of give it an allow list of places that can go and not go. And if you just run Cloud Code out of the box, some of the other agents are the same way, but they tend to have full safety mode on by default. The more comfortable you get with your agents, the more frustrating that becomes, because it's asking you every single time. If I just run Cloud Code by default on my machine, it's kind of annoying out of the box on a new project, because it's going to start asking me the same things it's asked before. Hey, can I run this bash command? Hey, can I access this file location? What about this temp directory? What about this website I want to go to? And so it's asking every single time. And sure, over time, it's creating an allow list inside of that project. And it has other features where you can sort of give it an intelligent auto approve mode where it detects whether it should ask you or not. But if you just want to let it go, otherwise known as YOLO mode, that's really, once you get confident with these models and your own harness, you just want it to do that. But you also don't want it to have access to your entire GitHub organization, or have the ability to delete repos or delete infrastructure. And if you're in the infrastructure game, you've got these keys locally on your host machine. You probably have access to things with built-in logins. I know that my AWS and DigitalOcean login CLI tools just have access by default. So any command typed at my command prompt is going to have access to that infrastructure. I don't necessarily want the agent to have access to that stuff all the time. I kind of look at this as personas. I want my agent to have certain personas. In certain cases, that agent might be read-only and have access to only the repo that I've given it. And it has access to no command line tool API keys. And then maybe I lean in at some point and give it access to a certain portion of infrastructure, maybe staging. And so I might only give it access to keys that have the access to those things. And then as I get more comfortable, or I'm ready to actually go production, and maybe in this case, I want to pay much more attention to each individual command. Maybe I want to manually approve each command. So I see this as an evolution of my access to infrastructure from the agent's point of view. I don't always want it to have complete access. So sandboxes have various levels of functionality to control all of that. And I think we're going to end up with at least these 4 models going forward. We possibly could have another model where it is maybe something that's more cloud oriented or cloud controlled, where there's proxies in the middle, or there's some sort of cloud component that these agents are running through. Those are all starting to evolve and mature. But let's start with this left side, the host native stuff, which is, I think, the easiest way to get started, particularly if you're on Linux or Mac, where it seems like the tools are a little more mature there. Host native, the first one right out of the gate is just using Cloud Code out of the box. And if we jump over to Ghosty over here, let me just jump into my Gasa tool. So I have a little utility for scanning GitHub repos for security problems that I'm building. It's not yet released, but it's a tool I'm working on. And if I just start up Claude in this directory, by default, you're going to see, right, the permissions mode down at the bottom. And I don't have the risky mode enabled, basically the YOLO mode. I don't have it enabled. So it's going to ask me for most commands unless they're in something like, if we look at the is it settings? Let's actually look there. Let's do that over here. Yeah, so like you have this allow list that happens over time, and that's just kind of annoying, especially as you get good at this stuff. You just want it to go. So one of the things we can do, built into Claude, or into Claude Code rather, is the sandbox mode. So you just type /sandbox. The way this works is it's going to create settings in a config file, essentially, inside of Claude Code, but it's going to talk to the OS kernel. In this case, I'm on Mac, so it's going to talk to the Mac kernel and use the Mac kernel's built-in sandboxing technology. And if I type that command, I get a couple of choices. Weirdly, by default, this is not enabled. You might get a tip if you use Claude Code long enough. It'll mention to you when you're running it, hey, did you know I have a sandbox mode? I wish this was during the setup. I wish this leaned in to sandboxing by default, because it isn't horrible to use and it's safer than just running this thing without any sandboxing technology. So it's got 3 modes out of the box. The default mode is option 3 down here, no sandbox. And we can look at the docs real quick just to see if it actually describes a little bit. I actually wanted to know and see if it tells me exactly how it works on Mac. Yeah, okay. On Mac, it's known as seatbelt. And on Linux, it uses bubble wrap. So I don't believe there's a Windows support for this. Technically, on Windows, if you're running this inside of WSL2, you're really kind of sandboxing it already inside of WSL. You can spin up a new WSL instance with the WSL command line tool. You can spin up a new Ubuntu or a new Debian. Sort of, it creates, it's not truly isolated because it doesn't necessarily control networking, but it can give you a separate file system mount so that you can let this thing run in without any of the safety features on, and it will work on Windows. So you can argue that maybe Windows doesn't need a lot of this, but the sandboxing here is supported on Mac. So in Mac, we're going to be basically enabling seatbelt, which is a part of the kernel, and we don't have to care about that. We don't even need to know that that thing exists. We're just turning this on. And I tend to run it in the sandbox bash tool with auto allow. And it says here, auto allow mode commands will try to run in the sandbox automatically, and attempts to run outside of the sandbox fall back to regular permission. Explicit ask deny rules are always respected. So if I don't turn off the safety features by exiting Claude Code and running it with the optional command, this is not really going to do much for me. It's adding a little layer of protection, but it's still hampered by constantly asking me permission. So what I really want to do is enable this sandboxing and then disable any of those permissions. So I'm going to use the auto allow because I kind of trust how this works. If I want to maybe lock this down even further, I could maybe do regular permissions, which doesn't auto allow. And regular permissions means that rule set that you just saw earlier, it's going to follow those rules. And notice that it says sandboxing the bash tool, which means it's only going to worry about locking down when it calls out to bash. Now, when you talk about am I dyslexic? When you talk about tool calling in Claude Code or any agents, there's a list of tools that come out of the box with your harness. Some of the more basic agents like Pi only come with like a file read, a file find, or a file write, and then bash, which covers anything else the agent needs to do. So bash is kind of the universal tool that you can do most, if not all, things with. Some would argue that really the only tool it ever needs is bash, because it can access the internet from that using curl and wget and web search tooling, and then it can do anything else on your computer, including programming, installing stuff, and running literally everything on your computer through the command line. So some might argue that we only need one tool, but we sometimes have easier ways to find files, to read files by using separate tools. So here it's really only going to mess with the bash. Actually, if we go back in there, we can see there are overrides. So allow unsandbox fallback, which is dumb. Basically, if it can't do it, it's just going to fall back to not locking it down and always allowing, which effectively disables this. So I don't know why you would enable one. So I go with 2, strict sandbox mode. And it says here, all bash commands invoked by the model must run in the sandbox unless they are explicitly listed in the excluded commands. So we're going to allow the strict sandbox mode here, which is really the whole point. I'm not really understanding the fallback method. Maybe that's more around if you've ever done something like a WAF or any sort of network appliances or local lockdown tooling, you know that sometimes they have an audit mode. I would call this, number 1, the audit mode, where it means I'm just going to watch and flag when I would have triggered or normally locked you down, but I'm not in any way going to lock you down. So I would call that audit mode. Maybe that's something you just do on day 1 to see if this would even work. But hey, we're just running an agent for local development. Like, it's not a big deal. Let's just try it and see what happens. And then lastly here, well, it just keeps doing that, doesn't it? Oh, there we go. Okay, so the config is it's kind of showing me the results at the end. So I set the mode, I set whether allowed it's audit only or to actually do the lockdown, and then it shows me how exactly it's going to config. You'll notice that it has down here network restrictions as well, as where it allows different URLs. I kind of want to just give it full network. I'm not too worried about internet prompt injection if I'm already sandboxing this thing and limiting its ability to do things on my machine. I'm kind of okay with it going out and doing stuff on the internet because the blast radius is much lower, right? So we just hit enter or exit if it's not changing anything. And now what I can do is I can exit back out and run Claude. We can look at the help. This is for anyone who's used Claude more than probably a few weeks. This is a very common command that we all start looking for, is how to turn off the darn safety. And you can see this option. Sorry, I had to zoom out to find it, but you can see the dangerously skip permissions. And that's really, at the end of the day, like, that's kind of what we all want. Once you trust your model enough and you've sandboxed things enough to protect yourself, you really just kind of want this to be the default. Yeah, and you notice how it says bypass all permissions checked, recommended only for sandboxing with no internet access. So maybe on day 1, we do keep it locked down for the URLs, but if you've been using Claude Code for 6 months on a daily basis, you kind of understand when it goes outside the lines, and the models are at least a little bit more predictable than they were a year ago. So we can do something like Claude with the dangerously skipped permissions. And now we're completely bypassing permissions. And if we check sandboxing just to confirm, it says sandbox enabled, auto allow. I can just validate my configuration. I'm good to go. And I can start work. Now, we can sit here and try to see what it could do. For example, one of the problems is this may allow me to run any commands on my machine, including things like the DigitalOcean or AWS CLIs or Terraform or anything that might have access to remote infrastructure like the GitHub command line tool. So, you know, like I could do, if I'm in here and I do something like repo create Brett Fisher this test 2, and oh yeah, so it's asking for the required stuff. So public, well, let's just do a private. Okay, so it looks like it's getting denied, possibly because of the because of the network lock. But my point here is that what's probably going to happen is that it still has complete access to my local command line, which means it's not going to block tool calls to certain CLIs unless I put them in some sort of excluded list or denied list. And so this isn't really as fully safe as I want it to be. I want this thing, honestly, to have its own area where it bind mounts in my code to something, but doesn't have access to any of my local command line tooling, and it's completely isolated. Essentially, at the end of the day, I want to be able to give Claude or my model my pats, but I want those API keys or those pats that I'm giving it to be specifically for it with the specific permissions that I want it to have. Maybe read only, maybe I give it read write but not delete. I want to be able to control all those at a granular level because I just don't know what other things I'm forgetting. I have Git access to lots of things that I'm not thinking about, like maybe other organizations that it could potentially have access to if it decided to go rogue. So this protects my local system in terms of file system access to different places, but just by the nature of it running locally on my host file system, it has access to NPM. It could install things with brew. For example, I could do, if I just did brew search sandbox. Yeah, see, it's pulling back data from the internet, which means it's able to run a tool that has a local config on my host machine, and that tool could write things outside of the sandbox because that thing maybe has access elsewhere, but my agent only has access to certain directories. So it's a little wonky on the edge cases of exactly where this thing stops. And it's not a full VM. It's not an isolated container even. It's really still running on my host file system. So the problem with this is that we may be able to go back to docs and configure this thing in a way that is fully safe in the way I want. But that is complex, and there's a lot of details here that would have to be added to config files in JSON. And you can see here like granting sub-process write access and lots of different config options. But this really starts to get super complicated right out of the box, right? Like you end up realizing that you might have to create one of these configs for every project, or at least maybe every persona, as I'm calling it, every type of access. So maybe I have a persona that is read-only to my GitHub repos. Maybe a different persona has read-write to all my GitHub repos, but only in my current account and not to any organizations, and certainly not access to infrastructure directly. And so I would have to create those files and manage those. And I don't believe that that kind of tool would exist. Like I need some sort of automation here. I don't want to be micromanaging this stuff on a daily basis. And I certainly don't want to be creating this per project. That sounds insane. So this tool is a little raw. It's out of the box. It's great. It's something that I have always enabled. So I think that's something that we should just do. Claude Code, always enable it. You can look up in other... the other tools, most of them don't have another feature. Actually, if I think about it, I've asked Claude before, and I'm going to have to look up my answer. Let's see if I have an answer. Sandboxes, sandboxing agents. So I had a conversation, and I think I was asking somewhere in here the different levels of support. No, this may not be the one. I'm going to search. Yeah, I thought it was in here. Anyway, somewhere in here, I have answers around exactly which sandboxing features and functionality exist. And there's really only a couple of harnesses. I can't remember if it's Copilot or Codex. I do believe Cursor might also have some sandboxing, but things like OpenCode, Pi. A lot of these other open source and third-party tools may not have it. I'm not sure about AMP. I'm not sure if AMP has it. So the internal built-in support is pretty sparse. It's pretty limited, and it's also highly dependent on which harness you're using. So maybe we want to escape this scenario and we want to use something external. And I like this idea more because an external sandboxing tool means that it doesn't matter which harness I use. And I think for all of us, we might have a favorite harness today, but that might not be the harness we're using in 6 months. We might have moved on from Claude Code to something else. We might like Open Code or go back to Copilot, or Codex might be the way to go. And the other issue is that these built-in tools are highly dependent on whether it's the TUI or the GUI version. And I want something that's flexible to regardless whether I'm using a GUI or a TUI. I want it to be using something else. So there's another tool in the market that I have used called ohno. And ohno.sh. So I'm going to throw this into chat in case you have not heard of this one. And I'm really excited about this one. This is an open source project from the makers of SigStore. So in other words, some of the core team are security-minded people that do security as a profession and write code for security. SigStore is a security-related product, or at least a series of products. It is a set of policies and tools and stuff that we're not going to get into. But this is a tool that I have been using more and more. And out of the box, you just basically install it locally. I think it may only work on Mac by default. Let's see. I think does it do? Yeah, isolation for Mac and Linux. So again, it's using the same kernel tools that Claude Code uses. Like it says here, Mac OS is using Seatbelt, which is a built-in functionality API of the OS kernel. And then, and it says the same sandboxing framework behind every Apple App Store application. And then does it say is it using the same thing in Linux? On Linux, it's using Landlock LSM, which I have not used directly. So it uses Landlock LSM to restrict file system access to the kernel level. And it just talks here a little bit about traditional sandboxing approaches like Docker or VMs introduce significant overhead. I agree. That's not always something we want, although there are definitely use cases. And a daemon, image management, networking configuration, and volume mounts just lets the agent, just to let the agent edit a file. Like that is a significant barrier. So over here on our diagram of types, we're moving on from the host native to host native outside, essentially host native tooling that we have to install. I'm going to take this one out. Actually, this is just going to be ohno here, and then host native harness. Oh, I see what I did here. Okay, so yeah, these are. Let me back up. How do I undo? There we go. So technically, there's two types here under the host native kernel. We have the third-party ones like ohno, and then we have the built-ins like Claude. While we're sitting here, let me just let's see if we can get it. Can you research the popular harnesses like Claude Code, Codex, Cursor, and Copilot, and tell me which ones have built-in sandboxing technology? Oh, okay. It didn't fill that in. I was working on the audio there. Let's try that again. Research popular harnesses like Claude Code, Codex, Cursor, and Copilot, and tell me what sandboxing technologies they have built in and compare the sandboxing functionality. Across harness. All right, so we'll spin that one off. So technically this is two types. We have both includes built-in harness features and third-party tools. So let's look at ohno real quick. If you look at their example here, I think, do they have an example on their home screen? Yeah. So interesting. I've never used the undo and rollback. So they list 5 major areas of functionality here. The kernel isolation is really what I'm focused on, using seatbelt to basically have an allow list of file system locations. And then content addressed snapshots capture file system data before every session. So that's interesting. I haven't actually tried to roll that back, but I didn't even really know that that was a thing. Audit trail of Merkle tree committed session logs with cryptographic integrity verification. That sounds very fancy. Supply chain provenance. SigStore backed signing ensures instruction files were authored by trusted identities. I'm not sure about that one either. And then runtime supervisor, dynamic permission expansion with approval flow workflows. So I really have only used, that I'm aware of, this base feature. And if you walk through on the docs, they talk about installing it, and then you have to build a command. And the command has a config that you can use a profile. You essentially create a persona or a profile for how ohno is going to work. And out of the box, it's got some built-in ones. And I have played with the Claude Code one. So the nice thing is, out of the box, it has this config file. Here's an example where it's showing you the different type of things you can control. The file system is the obvious one, where you can give it read, write, and different types of permissions to different locations. Then you've also got whether or not you even want to bother with networking. So like in my case, if I'm already going to isolate this thing pretty hard, I'm just going to give it complete network access and not worry and sweat about that, because I don't want to have to manually approve each URL that it goes in curls when it's doing research for me or whatever. I have my agents doing that a lot. Like, I wanted to evaluate these 3 different submodules and compare and contrast which one I should probably be using in the project. So it's going to go and do a bunch of web searching. I don't want to have to approve individual URLs. That's too tedious for me. And then you can actually stuff credentials in here. So the nice thing is it doesn't necessarily have access to your host environment variables, only the ones that maybe you give it. So I can lock down at least, I don't necessarily store a lot of secrets in my environment variables. I try to keep them out of those, but you can at least control that stuff. And so it's got an out of the box, and you can sort of start from that, build use a default profile, and then build on top of that to customize your situation. There isn't one for every environment, unfortunately, but at least it has my 2 favorites, OpenCode and Claude Code. If I couldn't use those, I would back up and use either Copilot and Codex. So it doesn't have a Copilot out of the box, but at least it has Codex and OpenClaw. Obviously, like, if I was ever going to run OpenClaw locally, which I would not, I would be using something like this for sure to protect myself from OpenClaw going wild on my system. All right, so that kind of fills out this. If we want to show it real quick from the command line I would basically just do no. And you can see here, since I've already run it on my ZSH shell, I have the command completion here. So yeah, I'm doing no run, and then the profile. So I'm telling it use the profile for Claude Code, and then dash, and then that's where you put in whatever command you want it to run. I don't technically have to run Claude here. I could run whatever I want, but the whole point of this is to run Claude. I want to run it with -c, which means continue the previous conversation. And I also maybe want to do run Claude with the dangerously skip permissions. Right, so I might do that right there, and then also maybe -c to automatically run the previous session, or I could do a -r, which lets me choose from the previous sessions, and then the first thing it does, it goes, oh, hey, I'm no. I'm going to install myself. Install the Claude Code profile is protected by this registry pack. First time seeing this prompt, background, trust model, and what gets installed. That's weird. I haven't actually, this must be a new feature. Publisher, always further, which is the organization that creates no. So it's trusting, it's asking me basically to trust the profile, and it installs the sandboxing profile plus the Claude Code plugin. Okay, that's right. So one of the things this has is hooks, because it needs kind of hooks into your harness in order to notice when the tool calling happens, right? It needs to know when the harness asks to do certain things so that it can grab it and sort of elevate it to the ability for me to control it. So I've not seen this prompt before, so this must be a new additional feature. I'm actually going to click on it. I want to go over here and see what they say. Okay, yeah, this is from last week. This page explains a change in no 43 that may affect commands you've been running. If your workflow stopped working after upgrading, this is probably why. It says that in .42 and earlier, a few profiles like Claude Code and Codex and their matching agent integrations were compiled directly into the no binary. You could run no run with the profile Claude Code on a fresh install and nothing else set up. But in 43, those built-in profiles are now removed, and the same content now ships as registry packs. And it says that these provide the Claude, Codex, and opencall profiles plus plugins for the harness. The first time you run it for one of these profiles, no notices that the profile isn't installed locally and asks whether to fetch the pack from the registry. Two practical reasons why this is happening. The agent integrations move faster than no itself. Okay, so Claude Code, Cursor, and others ship breaking changes on their own schedules. When the integration logic was inside the no binary, every one of those changes needed a no patch release to keep up. So we're adding these essentially as plugins. That's a good idea. And then the second reason is the no code base doesn't carry per agent knowledge anymore. The pack mode lets no stay focused on the sandbox primitives itself, and then the agent-specific code lives next to the agent. So this is cool. What this actually means is that if I wanted this is cool, because if I wanted to do this for Pi, which I do, I'm using Pi harness more and more lately, just to, it feels much more closer to the metal, closer to the model. And I like seeing exactly what's going on in my thinking, exactly which tool calls are happening, which commands. And I like seeing all that stuff raw sometimes, especially when I'm learning. So I use the Pi harness, pi.dev. And the Pi harness doesn't even come with web search out of the box. Like, it has nothing. It's extremely raw. And sometimes I like that. Sometimes I want to know exactly the things that I'm building inside my harness. It's basically Vim mode for harnesses in my experience. So what's cool is I could create a Pi config, which I didn't necessarily have before. I had tried to put one together, and it wasn't really working the way that I had hoped. But what's cool here is that I might be able to add hooks into the Pi harness, and then even if no doesn't ship that, I can ship it separately and use it as, I would hope, a third-party plugin. So let's go back, and we're going to say yes, which essentially means it's adding more hooks into Claude Code. We can see that that's happening right here. It's adding it into the Claude plugin JSON for this repository. So this is cool. It's only doing it for this repo, not as a global thing for Claude Code. and it's adding a skill to my repo so that it allows my harness to understand how to manage no-no, which is, I thought kind of the point here is that no-no works outside. So hopefully this doesn't mean that my agent can control no-no from inside the agent, because that's kind of the point, is that you don't want that. So we'll have to explore further to see what's going on there. Share this directory with read and write access. Use allow. I don't actually know what this means. I'm good to say yes. I'm assuming what that means is, does it want me to give no the permissions to allow Claude to write files inside of this directory? I assume that is yes. Oh, yeah. So this is interesting. It gives access. This gives read-write access to my keychains. I'm not sure I want that. I'm very interested in that one. That one's curious. And then you can see that it's giving read access to no configs, which is good. I guess it maybe needs those. And then read write to this directory. And then profile, yeah. So I'm assuming this is minimal. And net outbound allowed. So everything it seems like is allowed out. So now I'm in Claude Code, and this is the Claude Code experience. I don't even know that no is running in the background. From this point on, I shouldn't really be bothered with it, and that's kind of the point. Is this thing just should run transparently? What I assume will happen is that as it runs into edge cases where it's going to deny things, I'm not sure if the new version gives me a different experience, but yeah, I don't really want any of these, so I'm just going to okay. Looks like we just had our first 4 paths are permanently restricted, overrides via user with a file system bypass protection, also blocked, paths to be saved. Ooh, that's weird. Oh, see, look at this. Okay, well, you know what I think is happening is I think that Claude Code is trying to access browsers in order to control browsers with the Claude Code extension. And this is actually pretty cool, because what it's saying is that it gave Claude Code certain access. Claude Code during the session tried to access other things, and it's saying here, yeah, these marked paths are normally blocked by security policy. Saving them adds bypass protection, which weakens Sandbox protection. Save denied paths as user profile, and basically no, I don't want it to access my browsers. In normal Claude Code settings, I maybe just don't want it to have any access to my browsers at all. And only if I'm doing maybe some sort of front-end development do I ever want to give it that. So maybe I have a different profile for that. So I could call something like Claude Code with browser as this profile. Save profile with the policy override shown above. So I'm going to override that. So it's going to say 3 new paths. And then if I want to use that one that we just made with the custom settings, it's showing me the command that I would run. I would basically choose my local profile, which has those. But the default Claude Code profile does not give it access to those directories. So I could do like this one again. And say yes. And then it's going to give the same thing. And then I can say, tell me about this project. Actually, let me change model. Let's do haiku. So tell me about this. So usually when you do a tell me about this project, it's going to give you, it's going to do a big scan, right? So it's going to look around, do some things, read a bunch of files, which kind of will trigger potentially a lot of the permissions settings that are going on in no. Is it trying to break out? Probably. But no, I think what that really is Claude Code, since it has the Claude Code extension in browsers, and there was an actual report recently. These comments are always whack inside of Instagram. I don't know if that's normal. Let me do that again. Yeah, I just got my answer. Exactly. So what it tries to do is if that extension is enabled, then it's going to make a connection between Claude Code and that extension so that it can do its thing. It can control it. I'm going to take a break here for a second and work on these. I thought I fixed this, but clearly it didn't fix it. Oh. My vertical format. Oh, well, the comment just went away. Okay, so it's gone. Bye-bye. All right, so we can see here that it did some things. It did probably some tool calling. So let's exit. And then, it didn't warn me. I wonder, because it was the first time, I need to probably, there's probably a setting here for, ooh, that's a lot of settings. We don't want silent mode. We probably want to basically create a profile or listen, add file system state hashing and sign. Yeah, I'm sort of wanting that first time experience again. Let's see how I can get that. Yeah. All right. So there's a lot of stuff here I have not used yet. Show what would be sandboxed without executing. That's interesting. So if I did a dry run here on that same command, actually, no, I got to put it back here. Okay, so yeah, so it's showing me those same capabilities that are out of the box. And enable runtime capability elevation. No. Oh, no rollback prompt. Skip the post-exit rollback review prompt. Yeah, I'm not finding what I'm looking for. Basically, what I was hoping is that if I wanted it to listen and create a new profile based on what it did the first time, I want to do that a second time because I'm thinking here I want two profiles. I want one where it can access the browser and one where it can't. And the default one, I'm assuming what's happening here is that if I could just keep running this the way that it is, it's just going to deny access to the browser and not even tell me. It's not going to warn me when it exits. And actually, now that I think about it, it's got access. It's got a skill. It's already got a skill. So let's just do it. Let's just do the skill. No. Yeah, so there's a no sandbox skill. And so, no, that's not what I want. And then how can I create a new profile by watching file system access and creating a profile based on what you try to do while running. Let's see if it does that. How can I create a new profile by watching the file system access and creating a profile based on what you try to do when you're running inside a no-no? The core command is no-no profile trace, which records what your process accesses and outputs a profile. Okay. This will run your command, log every operation, and then output a profile based on what was actually accessed. And the cool thing about no-no is that this has nothing really inherently out of the box. There's no limitation on it just being for agents. Oh, I guess you can only live stream on Instagram for an hour. So I guess bye-bye, Instagram. I'm going to end the view this in your archive on the Instagram app. Okay. So the cool thing about no-no is that to me, it is a really cool, potentially really cool tool for you just learning how certain apps in your command line access the file system and do things on your computer. And so you could run this with really anything in it and then see what kind of things it's trying to do on your system. The next question I have is, can I use this with GUI Mac apps like VS Code? Can I use no-no what you can send? Oh, so it looks like it doesn't work. Here's why no is designed for CLI and terminal processes, not GUI apps. Oh, that sucks. Here's why GUI apps like VS Code are problematic. Mac's GUI subsystem, the GUI apps go through the dock and the native macOS application lifecycle, not through a terminal spawn. No-no's seatbelt sandbox applies at the process level, but GUI apps have additional entitlements and frameworks that bypass simple process sandboxing. Complex dependencies. VS Code and similar apps rely on system services, rendering engines, accessibility frameworks, and background processes that assume full file system access. Confining these would break the app, not the design goal. No-no is built for sandboxing commands you run, like build tool scripts or language runtimes for pack. Okay, so basically, no. Now it says your options are with VS Code, for example, is to use the built-in sandboxing, of which I do not know. I do not know how to use that. Or just use a container VM, which wouldn't work with a GUI app anyway on Mac. Or use a web-based editor. All right, so we're kind of limited there, which is unfortunate. Let's go back to our browser. So we've had Claude do some analysis for us real quick. What's up, David? And what I've asked it to do is do some analysis and compare sandboxing feature sets of the Claude Code, the Codex, the Cursor, and the Copilot, because everything's got to be a C. I guess that's the thing. Everything, every TUI, only the cool TUIs start with C. Sandboxing on by default. It is not default in Claude Code, but it does exist. In Codex, it is on by default. Cursor, no. And Copilot, oh, well, okay. So you can use a Cloud VM, but that's not the same thing. So on Mac file system, so yeah, so it looks like it's Claude Code and Codex. Basically, Cursor has none. Copilot has none for local, but Copilot can technically use remote cloud VMs. And so, you know, of course, if I could use a remote cloud VM, I would just run all these things in the remote cloud VM. I wouldn't even try to run them locally. So I don't know why. It doesn't really matter. So we're really just dealing with Claude Code and Codex. Those are really the two out of the box that have a built-in experience. I am more curious if I would rather honestly use ohno than try to use some built-in stuff. But that's just because I'm never using just one harness, and I don't know if I'm ever going to use just one harness. Yeah, so we're back to this. Let's go back here. So we've kind of looked at a couple of these, right? So the host native harness means it's basically whatever the built-in features are of your harness, which some of them don't technically have sandboxing, but they do have rules files or configs where you can control tool calling things, which when you think about it, the models don't have access to your file system directly. They have to go through a tool call, which means the harness is the gateway to the file system, running new programs, and anything else that the model wants to do. Because the only thing models can do is spit out tokens. It can only spit out words. And so the harness's job is to look at those words coming out, look for specific phrases or specific formatting of text, and that because these models are all trained on tool calling in their reinforced learning, these models know how to format their output text to trigger a tool call. So they can trigger bash to run. That's a harness feature, which technically means that the harness could control where and what it runs. And the problem with that is that the different harnesses are all different in how they do this. So it's very specific to the harness. There's no consensus on how this is supposed to work. And the research that I've done shows that the models tend to be able to get around it. So in most security audits, these features are breakable. The models can figure out advanced ways to get around the harness configuration. So this is like, in my opinion, this is the least trusting, but maybe potentially easiest to use because it requires no third-party installs. It requires no setting up of VMs or containers. It just works out of the box and your harness already knows how to do it. So you can even probably talk to your harness on how to configure it in harness. The next step, I think these are the next level. But you know, I'm gonna make another box for this. I feel like we need to break this out into two boxes because we have third-party tools. And then over here, let's see, what did Codex? Networking off by default, but sandboxing is on by default. Let's go check that out. If we're in... let's see if the sandboxing technology. Yeah, so skip. Okay, so they also have dangerously bypass approvals and sandbox. Skips all confirmation prompts and execute commands without sandboxing. Okay, so you can enable how does Codex sandboxing work? Is it always on? Can I configure it inside Codex while it's running? So we'll see what it says on that. All right. So next on our list, while we're working on that, so this basically I need to improve this UI here. I probably need to just ask Claude to do this for me. But these two are here, and these two are here, and then we have containers. So we all know containers. You can still do this with Docker today. In fact, I'm trying to think where I have something. Yeah, it must be in my work in progress. Maybe I didn't create a directory. Maybe I didn't do that. I think in this one, I was asking it to create a compose. Yeah, I was talking about dev containers. So dev containers aren't really the solution I'm looking for, but can it show me this? Okay, so I actually asked Claude to create me some compose files the other day to start from, and I haven't even looked at the results. But I personally like the container approach, and I've been kind of wanting to work on some very minimal, of which these are not, some very minimal compose files that can act essentially as profiles for running in any part of your computer. And I kind of would want this to be maybe not project specific, maybe global compose files that I can run from anywhere, that would allow me to be in a directory, run that instantly in a container with Cloud Code running. And the reason you would do this with containers in this case is it's better isolation, in my opinion, because it's running in a VM. So it's better isolation than the host isolation, because it doesn't have access to any of my keys or pats or command line tools. It doesn't have the ability to run brew or install anything on or npm on my host system. It can't mess with that. It's in a container. That's the whole point of containers, is that one of the key features is isolation. But there's a limit here. If I need this thing to also be able to run Docker, I have one of two choices I got to make. Either I have to give it Docker in Docker, which is complicated, problematic, and generally not something we want to do. That adds another level of complexity to this whole situation. Or I need to give bind mount access to the Docker socket. When I do that, though, that means that the agent inside of my little container can technically break out. Like if it went really rogue, if I was using a really old cheap model that just hallucinated itself to insanity, it could break out of that container, because anytime you have control of the Docker socket, you can essentially give yourself elevated privileges by mounting and doing things on the host. You could mount the root file system on the host in a new container and then do whatever you want there, right? So in general, I haven't had a harness an agent ever do that to me. I've never seen it try to go to that level, but I have seen examples of that happening to others. So if I need to give my agent access to run Docker, which I don't really want to do in a container, I might even consider doing that in a container if I'm maybe using a very trusted model experience. So if I'm using Opus and Sonnet, which don't tend to hallucinate for me, I trust those models. I trust GPT 5.4 and 5.5. So I might be okay with giving it access to the Docker socket so it can control Docker. But if I don't, then my next option is Docker Sandboxes, which is the sort of coup de grace or final solution for running locally. Because what this does is, unlike just running a container in the Docker VM, which has root access, this creates a whole new VM with Docker independently running inside that VM on its own Docker engine, Docker daemon, and then remoting me into that VM so that I can run everything in that VM. So essentially it's giving me root access or root equivalent in that VM for my harness. And this requires a lot of special things to happen. One, it needs to set up a micro VM, much like the Docker VM on my machine, but it's going to run a VM per project or per profile. So it's going to potentially have multiple VMs depending on what my setup needs to be. And then it's going to run and auto install Docker inside there. So when I need the agent to have access to Docker, it has that built out of the box. And Docker Sandboxes now has something called kits, which means I can customize these VMs and the containers that run inside them. I can customize that whole setup with all of my favorite tools that I might want to run in Claude Code or OpenCode or Codex. So this is the ultimate solution. It also has a UI in the TUI that gives me abilities to control networking and do sort of stuff without having to just manually edit a config file. It gives me sort of a UI experience a little bit. The negatives are that it downloads VMs in the background. It stores a lot of these things on my local file system. It's heavyweight because it's running inside a VM per project or per instance. It's pretty heavy. So I don't always want to run to that level of heaviness, if that's a word. So that's just a trade-off we're making. And so in each of these cases, I feel like there are trade-offs. And if we go from left to right, I feel like, as we drew an arrow here, we're going from, this is sort of like easy to use, but less isolation. And then on this side, we have full isolation, heavyweight, or heavy or harder to use. I wouldn't say harder to use. I mean, Docker's sandboxing is pretty easy to use. And if we're back here where my Claude Code was at, Docker's sandboxing tool is called, it's just called Docker Sandboxes, but the CLI is SBX. Well, David, K8S, okay, so why are my, oh my God, these things are so temperamental. With that there, and then it's like I keep breaking. I don't understand this. I keep breaking these. I don't know why it looks like that. really need to play with this offline, but I can't actually simulate comments when I'm not live. All right, one more time. Let's get this comment thing right. Yeah, all right. See? Oh my gosh, it's infuriating. I'm gonna have to play with that later. I just don't understand what the deal is. Who knows? Who knows if that's a bug or not? All right. Where were we? Sandboxes. Is it frozen? Let's see. My screen just went dead. Okay, it's back. Yeah, chat layout's wacky. I have to fix that. It's interesting. I'm just now noticing that I don't actually have the full window in this screen share on Ghosty. That seems like a Ghosty problem. I'm going to have to work on that too. All right. So what we're looking at here with sandboxing, let's get back to Docker sandboxes. So SBX is the command. You install it with brew. And let's see. Okay, so I don't have the command. It's forgot the commands. So let's go over to the docs. So you can see there's a sandboxing UI here. And you can see that they have, let's see, agents. So they have profiles for a lot more of the agents than ohno has. So obviously we've got Claude Code, the winner. But Codex, Copilot, Cursor, Droid, Gemini, Kiro, or Cairo, depending on how you want to pronounce that. Open Code, Docker Agent, and then just Shell, which basically just gives you a shell inside these sandboxes. So each one of these is a pre-built profile. And one of the things, because this is a full VM, what it means is that Docker actually has to provide you the harness, which means when you're running Docker sandboxes, you don't need any of these tools installed locally because they're running inside this VM where it's installed, hopefully, the latest version of that harness. So if we do SBX run Claude, actually, let's go back here to the GESA. Run Claude. And it's probably going to have to download a new VM. Yeah. So it's downloading. And so this looks familiar, right? This looks a little bit like Docker. But in the background, it's really all inside a VM. Come on. You can do it. You can do it. I believe in you. Okay. So here's the first problem, is it's using my API usage billing, not my subscription. What am I trying to, what word am I trying to say here? Subscription. Let's see. Let me come over here and see if I can find out. Yeah, so it looks like it does work with subscriptions. Okay, now we're back in. And now we're working with the subscription. Okay. Ooh, why is effort set to extra high? What is wrong with you? And you'll notice down here at the bottom, bypass permissions on. So this is a nicety. Docker is essentially running Claude out of the box with disabling all checks and security features because we're in a VM inside a container. So we're fully protected at this point. And if we go back over to Sandboxes don't pick up user level configs such as Claude. Only project level configuration in the working directory is available inside the sandbox. Yeah, so this is actually a complaint of mine. Sandboxes don't pick up user level agent configuration from your host. This includes directories like Claude and Codex, where hooks, skills, and others are stored. Only project level configurations. Yeah, see, I completely disagree with this. I don't. Part of the sandboxing of Docker in this way is already so heavy. It feels heavy because I know I'm running this in a VM and it's very project specific. And I might have a dozen projects I'm in the middle of. I mean, right now I'm definitely in the middle of half a dozen, and I don't even work for a company. So imagine a company where you're doing smaller products and you have dozens of repos. You're going to need dozens of VMs, and unless they've changed their model, at least they've changed if they've changed the design, great. I want to be able to use a single VM for multiple projects. Essentially, I don't want a bunch of VMs running on my system or stored on my system. And one of the things here is that I have highly configured Claude Code. Like I have global skills, I have global plugins, I have global settings, and I need Claude Code to have those. And for them to just blatantly say, nope, we don't do any of that, too bad. It feels like a hard edge that is going to reduce adoption, because once someone is a professional Claude Code user or a user of any of these, if they find out that all of their configuration and customization isn't really going to be possible inside her, or in other words, their customization is going to have to be project specific, that's really going to, I think, reduce the use of this thing. So I have tried to talk to people inside Docker and give my opinions, and it has not seemed to influence the decisions around this product yet. But my choice is to have this like a toggle, like include global or don't include global. Give me an option so that when I'm not paranoid about running these agents, I can at least have my global config in there as an option without having to do some sort of hacky solution. Like this is a hacky solution. Copying all my skills into the repo of my product. When these are skills that are, I have a dozen skills on my machine that I might be using in this project, but they're not skills only specific to this project, and I shouldn't be installing them per project. That's unnecessary. Like, why would I do that? Why would I install a front-end design skill in every project? It's the same Vercel front-end design skill. I only need it once on my system, and I definitely don't need it uniquely for that project. So this is a bummer for me. Now, that seems to be this is a global decision. This isn't just a Claude code only decision. Yeah, so see, there's only so much I can do here. So this to me is kind of just niceties wrapped around the experience of a VM. It doesn't really merge my host environment in a flexible way that I'd want, which is, to be honest, why I don't use it. I just have no need really in my own use to have an agent with this level of isolation, removing all of my customization, removing all my plugins and global settings, and forcing me into this pristine, sort of almost like a clean room approach. Now, if I were to do this on untrusted code, this is probably a good idea. Like if I'm downloading some app and cloning it into a repo that I don't trust, then I might like this. I might like this approach. Yeah. David, yeah, you can say, sure, add symbolic links, but they specifically say don't use symlinks. A sandbox agent can't follow symlinks to pass outside the sandbox. So won't work. It's not an option. There are things such that they call kits, which if I do, let's see, where's the kits option? If I create a kit, there is the potential for me to possibly copy things in that could allow me to customize and basically import my global settings, my themes, my plugins, my third-party tools, all the skills that I have at the global level. I might be able to actually bring those in through kits. I don't know. Okay, so on this kits page, it doesn't mention anything about globals or skills. Yeah. So I don't know what I'm going to do. Maybe I can try to talk to someone in the team again and see if I can't motivate them to give us some sort of middle ground here that's not so extreme. You're using Docker outside of Docker. So does that mean that what you're doing is you're giving the agent access to the Docker socket from inside the container so that it can control Docker on the outside? I honestly am, to me, that's a solid approach 99% of the time. Like, I think if that's what you're doing, that's a very appropriate response, especially if you have trust in your harness and models. And I do, like, I don't need Claude Code. I'm not scared of Claude Code and the current models the way they are going rogue and somehow routing my host system through controlling the Docker socket. I'm just not that concerned. I'm also not concerned about network egress from inside a container. If there is a scenario where the agent will possibly do some web searching and fetching of web URLs that could have potential prompt injection, I'm still inside a container. So the only scenario that I think is to me, the most likely scenario is that I somehow get the agent to get prompt injected through a website that it goes to that tells it to try to get Docker. So this prompt injection would have to know to use the Docker socket to then root into my host OS and somehow do like a bind mount on a container to the root of the file system on my host that allows it to. I mean, it's one of those scenarios where it seems so extremely unlikely. And honestly, right now in the industry, we have so much bigger fish to fry. We've got supply chain attacks happening on the daily. And my biggest concern right now is accidentally installing NPM utilities on my host file system that are going to root my file system and expose or basically exfil secrets from my host. That's the most likely thing to me today is an NPM install that has a post install script that somehow runs, and which it shouldn't, and I have it disabled in my system. You should too. Disable post install scripts in your NPM always. But that's to me, that's the real risk, and I just haven't seen it. And I don't even know that there's a proof of concept out there that works. I haven't seen that on the wild yet, where as a random website prompt injection of an untrusted web page is able to root through my agent to convince it to run a new Docker container from my host that then somehow elevates privileges to the agent. I know that it's probably possible, but do I really need to be that level of protection? If I'm working in DoD and DARPA, sure. But most of us aren't doing that. Most of us aren't at that level. That's pretty cool, Robson. Or is it just Rob? Is it Rob or Robson? Santos? Yeah, so that's perfect. Yeah, and you get workspaces. Yeah, and I'm curious if and yeah, you're using dev containers. I haven't. It's funny. I actually asked Claude about using dev containers inside of Sandboxes, and Claude discouraged me from trying to use dev containers as a sandboxing isolation layer. I can't remember why it said that, but it was like, yeah, these are two different things. You probably shouldn't use dev containers for this. So I have started down the rabbit hole of building out a set of stock compose files that I use that I haven't consistently used yet. In fact, it's been so long. It's been a couple of months since I've used them, so I don't even know where they live. I didn't document them well, but I feel like I need to do this. I need to create sort of a Claude code, a Pi, and an open code, my three main harnesses. Create a compose file that includes the repo, obviously, or any other repos it might need for that particular project. Includes my global agent configs. Includes any of my plugins and my global skill files and all the caching files, right? Because what I want is to be able to spin this thing up at any given time, and it has access to all of my memories, all of my Claude cache of previous sessions, and I wanted to have access to that stuff in a non-project specific way, because I don't operate agents in an isolated per project way. I might hop around directories inside of agents, and so I don't need to enforce on myself some sort of very strict per project config, because all my projects really have the same config. I mean, I trust the models the same. I trust the agent and the harness the same. So I'm not sure why I need very specific project isolation. If I'm running a Golang in this directory and I've got a web landing page project over here, they're largely going to be the same permissions and the same utilities that I have installed, the same linters, the same set of tools. Yeah. So I'm not sure why I need all that. Yeah, it says from a sysadmin point of view, but from a sysadmin point of view, I am trying to keep devs from getting out of the box. So when you say sysadmin point of view, you mean like someone who's managing someone who's managing developers and controlling their systems? Is that what you're thinking? Like, tell me more. Tell me more. Give me more information. My reason for using sandboxes is to limit the blast radius of anything that the agent might do that I don't want it to do on my host file system. That's my point. If I'm managing dev environments for developers and I'm giving them a sandboxing solution, I would say a non-security focused dev or a non-infrastructure dev is going to, in general, I'm going to paint a broad brush here. In general, those people are going to be less tolerant of a complex, arduous solution, because if they've been operating Claude Code indiscriminately on their host file system this whole time, and I'm coming at them saying, hey, we need to lock your stuff down, my solution better be really close to that experience or they're just not going to use it. And if you have an ability to control their systems, you could technically remove Claude Code from their machine and say that they can't even install it. They have to run it inside of your sandboxing tool. But I feel like for most people, the middle of the road approach is the right way to go. So when we look at these options, I feel like for most people, this area is where they should live. Like using the built-in Claude sandboxing or just educating your team on how to enable sandbox mode, that's going to help prevent the agent from deleting their root file system on Mac, which it wouldn't be able to do anyway because Mac's systems are read-only mounts technically, so you can't really delete system utilities. But you can certainly do things like inject into the path different binaries that you installed through brew or npm, right? Like, I mean, those things are all possible. So I would start with them over here. I might ask them to use ohno and maybe help them do that if they're on something that's not Claude or not Codex. We could just say Codex out of box experience. Or yeah, we need to just define this. I think up at the top we need to say built-in. Oh my goodness. My fingers. What is happening? All right. So the built-in options for Claude and Codex are here. And so I feel like this realm, like just to get a developer to use containers for developing is sometimes difficult to do. A lot of developers just don't want to use containers unless they have to. So I feel like providing them options and letting them choose is the right choice, like the right thing, instead of making a policy where there's only one thing they can do and that's the only way they can do it. I try to give devs as much tool choice as possible. That keeps them happy, that keeps them in their jobs, that keeps them from being frustrated and leaving. And I'm trying to not be IT cartel. I'm trying to not enforce a single policy. So I want to really say, hey, let's use the built-in stuff. Let's create policies that we can use throughout the different harnesses, because some people might not want to use Claude Code. And some teams, I would say the majority of teams I work with, people use different tools throughout the team. There's very few teams that I've worked with that they're only Claude Code for the entire team. So those people would only be able to use these two particular options if they were in a single harness. But most of us are multi-harness. Most of us have teams where one person's using, they're using Claude in the GUI. And the other challenge really here is that almost all of these tools don't help you with a GUI. The minute you want to use Codex the GUI or VS Code the GUI or Cursor the GUI, you're beholden to whatever that GUI's settings are. And I think almost none of those are centrally managed options, which means you're just really going to rely on your developers to do the best thing. And your hope is that by training them that they're going to do the right thing. So I feel like it's a messy situation, and it's really going to be up to the individual. What I do expect is that in ops teams or DevOps teams where they're managing infrastructure, they're managing Terraform and AWS, and they have the ability to remove repos or to delete entire organizations or to tear down servers or to blow away CloudFormation. When you have that level of access on your system, I believe that those people are probably going to lean into these areas. And if I drew a box around them and said, these are more of, let's send it back and let's make this more, these are going to be more ops sysadmin tools. That's what these are, I think. And then these over here are these are going to be more, let me zoom out here. See if I can't move these over a little bit. So these tools over here, let's make them more dev. It's an ugly diagram. And the reason I say more dev friendly, it's not like devs can't figure it out. I mean, we're all smart engineers. The question is really that the pain tolerance of their existing tool set and how much additional tooling you can enforce on a dev team before they resist and look for ways to work around your guidance or mandates. Because none of us really want to deal with security. Security is a pain. I mean, it's not awesome at times. And I would rather not have to use it in certain cases. So I feel like giving them more dev-friendly tools that feel native, that feel like there's not a bunch of hoops to jump through. The problem with a lot of these over here is the minute that something doesn't work, the minute that they're trying to use this, and if they don't understand the ins and outs of how all these tools work and how exactly the rules of the file system and kernel settings work, the minute they hit a roadblock, it's going to be frustrating. And if they can't just ask the AI to fix it, which is probably not a good idea because the AI is not supposed to be able to control the policies. So if they can't just say, hey, AI, fix this. I need access to this thing. Please add these permissions that you need in order to give me access to this particular thing. If they can't just do that easily, they're going to resist your tool and maybe just throw it away and not use it. So I'm always trying to design these tools so that even the most unwilling developer in my team that doesn't want to use these tools finds it transparent, finds that it just works. And so maybe the farther we get over here, I actually need this to be a double-edged arrow. How do I do that? Can I do that? Arrow type. I guess there's not a double-sided arrow. I thought I knew Excalidraw, but I don't. So, yeah, over here, we're talking a little bit easier, but less isolation. So I feel like the right approach is somewhere in the middle. People are used to containers. And so like you said, dev containers kind of works in there. So maybe this kind of merges a little bit and we've got these working a little bit better between the different tools. I don't know. I don't know where my diagram's going. And so maybe I draw one more box because we definitely need more complexity in this drawing. And we put this in the center. And we say, and we say this is like the happy path. Good security, easier to use. So regular old containers, honestly, to me, is one of the winning strategies here, even though it's not called a sandbox technology. It works. So if we do that, and then yeah, so as I make this diagram even worse. So my vote is containers or no-no. No-no policies, or and then there's this other one that I haven't even tried. There's OpenClaw, not OpenClaw, sorry. The openshell from NVIDIA, which I'm honestly not expecting to be impressed by. And then there's this veto, which I have not looked into. It's a pretty new one. It was only announced a month ago, so it's actually no. It was announced 2 months ago, so it's 2 months old as a project. And I don't quite really understand how this would be different from no-no. Maybe we'll just ask. We'll just ask over here. Can you tell me the difference between this new tool, veto, and no-no? Veto? I also like no-no. I just think that's a great name, no-no. No, it would be great if every time I denied some sort of file access that it had an audio loop in it that was like, no, so that you knew your agent was trying to misbehave. Yeah, and the other while this is figuring stuff out, the other beef I have here is that security, in order for everyone to use security and lean into doing something and trusting in the security to be necessary and required, there really needs to be a strong UX component where people will, like Docker solved problems for developers in addition to adding a whole new ability of security. It gave them new things. It gave them the ability to package their app up with all its dependencies and work reliably wherever they ran it. And that was seen as an advantage, a benefit to make their jobs easier, while at the same time it created security boundaries and isolation that protected systems and applications from escaping, hacks. I mean, essentially, like we had a whole class of security concerns that were essentially mitigated through just using containers. So to me, that's the reason Docker was successful, was that it had both. The security people and the operations people loved it for those reasons, but the developers also loved it because it solved some major dependency management problems that they had. in this case with Docker Sandboxes, we don't have that. Like it's all downside. I feel like it doesn't give me anything new I didn't already have. It only takes away. And so that is my concern with adoption, is that it needs to have a sweetener. It needs to possibly let me package these things up and maybe make them mobile. Maybe allow me to move this to the cloud instantly, or switch it back and forth with a single command, or give me something where maybe it auto copies stuff into it temporarily rather than connecting to my globals. Maybe it copies them in on the fly and just provides them as a mirrored copy in the repo, or sorry, in the VM. Like it needs to do something for me that I don't already have the ability to do today, so that I have a desire to want to run it. Otherwise, I'm just going to opt out. Like that, and that's what I'm doing right now. Like I'm generally not using these sandboxes unless they're either on by default, like the abilities of the built-in stuff, or if it's something that's so easy, like no, that there's no downside. It's a single command, and I never even knew I ran it. It's just completely transparent. If you're someone who loves operating containers all day, every day, then just having a compose file that pulls in your compose stuff and lets you run compose. I'm sorry, compose. It lets you run your CLI harness natively inside the container. When it can do that, it feels transparent. It doesn't feel like it's hurting anything. And if you're used to always developing in containers, that's great. But that doesn't translate to Docker sandboxes in my experience. So because the sandboxes, at least I don't believe yet, have dev container abilities, like it would be pretty cool maybe if your dev container could get sucked in to Docker sandboxes, so it would just use those right out of the box. Let's see if that's a thing. Yeah, it's not on that page. I got a feeling it's not built in. Like yeah, they don't even mention the word sandboxes. Yeah, because to me, dev containers and these sandbox kits have a lot in common. They're both trying to set up my environment and prep it so that it's ready for me the minute it starts. That includes bind mounting things in, that includes adding environment variables, that includes adding packages that are auto-installed on startup, or possibly even using a base specialized container. I'm assuming TCB, I'm assuming that's one of the reasons you use it, is dev containers gives you a lot of this tooling out of the box per project that you are used to. And if I was going to ask somebody to use Docker sandboxes, I wouldn't want to have to make them create a whole complete different environment setup that mirrors their dev container setup, and then they have to keep the two in sync. It just doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel right. So, all right, let's go back over here to see if it's what's it saying? Okay. These are solving similar problems, but they from different angles. Here's the breakdown. Veto is ohno's kernel-level enforcement engine built on BPF LSM, and it uses content addressable. Okay, so the fact that it says BPF, that tells me it's Linux-based. It identifies executables by hash, not by path. The attack is specifically designed to defeat is the one ohno documents against Cloud Code. An agent copies a binary to a new path to bypass a path-based deny list, then disables the sandbox when it gets caught. Hash-based identification makes path tricks irrelevant. The binary is the binary regardless of where it lives. The technical mechanism, okay, current only enforces the exec gate with network file. It's not a standalone tool. It's a vertically integrated platform where each agent gets its own VM with a dedicated kernel, runs deploy inside the customer's VPC, and sort. Okay, so yeah. So in other words, not interesting, not what we're looking for. I can throw it out. All right. Ooh, it says here, I like its opinion on Nono. Nono is Apache, installable via Brew, and from the creators of SigStore. It wraps OS native kernel primitives, seatbelt. Yeah, we know that. We know that. In a capability set API with 5 layers. Kernel. Yeah, we know that. We read that on the marketing. The API is what makes it interesting for harness builders. You describe capabilities programmatically. It also has credential injection using a proxy-based secret management, ghost sessions, which are detachable session lifecycle, and native SDKs for Python, TypeScript, Rust. Veto requires buying into ohno's enterprise platform. Okay, so goodbye, Veto. Now I'm going to ask, tell me the difference between the new tool, OpenShell. And we'll paste in, I'm going to paste in NVIDIA's OpenShell. And no. Okay, so we're going to have it evaluate OpenShell as well. And I haven't used OpenShell. I don't know if anybody's used OpenShell. Let me know if you have. OpenShell came out as a sort of a way to run Claude code, or I'm sorry, OpenCode. OpenClaw. It's a way to run OpenClaw safely. To learn how OpenShell enforces isolation across all protection layers, refer to Sandboxes. Yeah, it says NVIDIA's OpenShell is an open source runtime for executing autonomous AI agents in sandbox environments with kernel level isolation. It combines sandbox runtime controls with a declarative YAML policy so teams can run agents without giving them unrestricted access to local files, credentials, and external networks. So it sounds very similar from that. Robot Glock, just bash. Is that, what is just bash or Nix? I mean, I know what Nix is, but I don't know what just bash is. Is that a skill? Is that a CLI? How exactly is that sandboxing my agent harness? I'm just curious what you think. Because I don't know of that one. OpenShell runs inside a Docker container. Each sandbox is an isolated environment managed through a gateway, a control plane API that coordinates sandbox lifecycle and state, acts as the auth boundary, and brokers requests across the platform. It's a containerized runtime with a daemon architecture, not a library you embed. That's the fundamentally different model. Nono is something you bolt onto existing harnesses in an environment. OpenShell requires Docker and a running gateway. OpenShell's unique feature, the privacy router. This is what Nono doesn't have at all, and what makes OpenShell interesting is an NVIDIA product. When the agent opens a connection to inference.local, the proxy handles it as a managed inference before policy evaluation. OpenShell strips sandbox supplied credentials, injects the configured backend credentials, and forwards the request to the managed model endpoint. So the Docker Sandboxes does a little bit of this as well, like credential injection is a feature they both use. In other words, OpenShell intercepts outbound LLM API calls and transparently reroutes them. An agent thinks it's calling Anthropic or OpenAI. OpenShell can silently redirect that to a self-hosted model, a private backend, or a cost-controlled proxy. Okay. So it's solving a different problem there that for rerouting models, a network proxy. Yeah, it's funny. They both have features that the other one doesn't. and it's funny. I think it said earlier that the privacy routers. Okay, so it looks like OpenShell will inject secrets if they're in API calls, but OpenShell injects credentials. But I don't think it does it at the networking. I don't think OpenShell has any sort of networking. It has network access allow deny, but it doesn't have network proxies where it can actually change out the HTTP call and throw in bearer tokens or whatever. And I think that's what both Docker sandboxing and OpenShell both can do because they have a networking and a fancy networking gateway component. I'm very curious about this, Vercel. Just bash. A simulated bash environment with a virtual file system. So is this a CLI? Is this a plugin per harness? Let's see. All right, here we go. A virtual bash environment with an in-memory file system written in TypeScript and designed for AI agents. Broad support for standard Unix commands. Okay, so you can install it with npm. Each exec call gets its own isolated shell state, environment variables, functions, and working directory. So how would I use this with Claude Code, for example? Or is this really just for custom agent building? It says designed for AI agents, but they're not specific enough to say whether or not it's for harnesses or just for custom built server agents. Like, there's a problem with us naming things in the industry. Everything's an agent right now, and it's very confusing. There's all these different terms that we're really calling them the same thing. We're calling them agents, and we need to be more specific. So to me, my local harness is an agent harness. That harness, like Claude Code, has multiple agents, and those agents have tools, of which Bash is one of them. And then I can also develop custom programs that use agent SDKs, which run on servers, the only thing that has in common with my local agent harness is that they both use a model at some point in their code. But they're both called agents. Like, it drives me crazy. So from my point of view, those things that I develop that run they're long-running apps that run on servers that happen to have access to models, APIs, I call those server agents. And the thing I'm running on my local system, like Codex and Claude Code and OpenCode and Pi, are called either coding agent. Well, maybe a coding agent might be an alternate term, but I call them agent harnesses. And then if I'm using OpenClaw or Hermes or one of these agent orchestrators, I call those orchestrators or agent orchestrators. So I'm trying to be consistent with my own terminology when I talk to people and when I make videos, because I think I even made a video in my course. Hey, did you know I make courses? And we have a new one. If you go to brettfisher.com and you click on the Guild is my new membership program that comes with courses. And right now, this is already shipped. I need to update this page. So I'm building multiple courses at the same time, and the Guild gets them as each video is finished. and we meet every week in the guild and we talk about DevOps for AI. We talk about how we use AI harnesses to do our DevOps and platform engineering work. We talk about how to even get these things to operate correctly. Obviously, we talk about a lot of development things, and mostly we're just talking about Claude Code and all the other harnesses and how to get them to work correctly and efficiently and cheaply and all that stuff. So in this course, the agent harness setup for DevOps, I just finished the agent direct. I have like 5 or 6 videos, I think, at least 4 videos on agents. And right now I'm working on the skills videos. But in one of those videos, I actually have to define all the terms, because when we go back to our diagram, I have to talk about the different types of agents. So I have this slide that's all the different terms that I use and what exactly those mean. And so I have to define the difference between what an agent harness is, what an agent is, a sub-agent, and custom agent, and then I don't even see a server agent on here. I need a new term. Server agent. A custom program with with model API access that it is usually long running on a server. Might use agent SDKs. Not meant as coding agents. Yeah. So that's me trying to define the differences. Ask Claude Code how it would use. Yeah, of course. I'm just going to ask the model. You can configure Claude's bash tool to use just bash as its execution engine. Oh, okay. So Claude would still run normally, but we were swapping out the tool. When you all first mentioned this, my assumption was this is basically a way for me to create a custom tool for my harness. This reminds me of the container use from. This is from Dagger. Dagger has this tool, and I'm not sure if they're still maintaining it. Well, 3 months ago. Yeah, so it's still getting updates. But Dagger has this tool called container use, and essentially does the same thing. I think they do it through MCP, which isn't great. But the idea here is that you tell Claude essentially to do everything it's going to do at the shell, do that inside a container, and then return results. And this, you don't tell it to really use them inside a container. You tell it to use this tool, and this tool will then run things in a container and then spit back the difference of that tool call. And it's like a year old. I think that they launched this a little over a year ago. I tried it back then, but the problem was at the time was getting the harness to obey and use only this MCP as its tool calling approach. It was problematic. So I wouldn't be surprised if a better approach is something like just bash, or changing this to not be MCP, but to be a custom tool inside my harness. I think that'd probably be better. So would I consider open code both a harness and an agent? Open code, like Claude Code, like Codex, is an agent harness, or just harness, that runs agents. An agent is 4 things. An agent is the model choice, the system prompt, a list of tools that it can access, and a list of permissions for those tools. Those 4 things, once you wrap up all of them into a configuration, become an agent, and all of these harnesses come with agents built in, 1 or more. So like Pi comes out of the box with really just 1 main agent. Open code comes with 2 agents, plan and build. And those agents also can have sub-agents that allow it to do very, very specific things. Usually sub-agents, the distinction between an agent and a sub-agent is usually a sub-agent doesn't have, not always, but usually it doesn't have the entire context that the main agent has. So usually the reason an agent calls a sub-agent, which is really just one LLM making a new prompt, the sub-agent typically only gets the context of that prompt. And so it sort of starts with a fresh context. Doesn't always do that. Sometimes, depending on the sub-agent, it needs the entire context to do its job. But it's up to the prime agent or the main agent to manage all of those sub-agents. And it does that with a new prompt, essentially. And each of those can have their own system prompts. Each agent and sub-agent can have its own custom system prompt, which is separate from the harness prompting that you do inside of your little text box, right? Right. And I'm using the same terminology, right? So like if you go look at the open code tools or the open code documentation, they refer to those things as agents. So we shouldn't call the entire tool itself an agent because it has agents in it. And you're not always using the same agent inside it. So when you start looking at the larger picture and you start reading a lot of the documentation, you will see this word harness thrown around, but not always used. And I find that confusing. It's inconsistent in their own documentation. But we have seen specifically, I think there was someone last year that sort of defined the term harness and it caught on. And so now we're starting to see companies like Anthropic and OpenAI start to use the word harness in their terminology of their documentation. It's not always consistent, but I'm using it in hopes that I can just further along the approach of how we're trying to deal with these things and define the differences between making a custom harness versus making a custom agent versus making a server agent, which is to me, a server agent is just a program that I built that happens to have access to a model as part of its functionality. That's all it is. It may or may not use an agent SDK. Most of these tools that people are building that run on servers that are long-running agents on servers are using agent SDKs. Not always, because you could just build a raw app and use, essentially your app could have curl to just call the APIs and send stuff back and forth. But why do that raw when you can use an SDK, of which there are now at least a dozen SDKs out there? Each model provider has their own SDK, and then there are provider agnostic SDKs, and then there are infrastructure specific SDKs. Like there is a SDK for Kubernetes inside of K-Agent that allows you to build specific server agents that run or work with Kubernetes. And so to me, that's server agent. And in no way is a server agent related to my agent harness. I mean, I technically use an agent harness to build server agents. When you're in, for example, when I'm in Notion, the note-taking app, they have this brand new thing that they just built called custom agents, which in the background, that custom agent is them spinning up the 4 attributes of an agent, choosing the model, choosing the system prompt, choosing the tools it has access to, and then the permissions to those tools. And even in this consumer app of Notion, they call these custom agents that are providing instructions with all those different things built into this isolated little environment. And you can use different custom agents independently. So they're not calling that a harness because, of course, it's not a dev tool. And they're not calling it server agents. They're calling it custom agents. But it's fine. The terminology is up close enough there that I think that we're onto something. Yeah, I agree with you, Robot Glock. Yeah, I mean, we're making up these terms as we go along. Like a year and a half ago, we didn't even really understand what an agent was or a harness was. Before before Claude Code sort of showed up. I don't remember ever calling these things harnesses, but I do remember like the first day that Copilot gave us agent mode, right? Because it was different than just chat. It was different than giving a question or something and then getting a response. It was actually something that could go off and do work and think on its own and create its own prompts, which is essentially what it's doing, right? It's if you've ever dug into thinking mode and seen the hilarity of what these models are doing, because they're essentially arguing and disagreeing with themselves. That's what it sits there and does. When it's burning through your token count, it's just sitting there saying, no, actually, I think this might be oh, wait, no, maybe go look at this. Oh, let me go, okay, I see this. Like, who's it talking to? But that's how it reasons. When we say it's reasoning, it's not reasoning. It's not self-aware. It's not intelligent. It's just filling out text, then rereading that text, and then disagreeing with its own text, and then doing that over and over and over again until it gets to some point of saying, okay, I think I'm done arguing with myself, and then it presents you a result. We call that agent, or thinking mode, or whatever the model company decides to call it on some day. But all right, so I feel like I've beaten these to a dead horse, sort of, with these sandboxes. I feel like we've done the work there. All right, so the last thing I'm gonna leave with is, because we've been going a little over 2 hours. The last thing I'm going to do here is I thought I had this running. Oh, I need to, let me, oh, here we go. All right, so this, by the way, pro tip, when you're using your agents or you're just talking to a bot, you're talking to a model, try experimenting when you ask it to do research or you ask it to go find some information for you. Ask it to display the results visually in a web page. And then give it the front-end design skill. You don't always have to do that, but sometimes it improves the results. And you will get back, I'm collecting these, by the way. I've got at least 3 or 4 of them right now, but I'm collecting these dashboard results where it's so much better to see the results of my agent's work in a visual way with diagrams. And, this is so much better than text, right? Seeing it this way, seeing the results. So in this case, something interesting I did recently was I wanted to understand I was making videos on the agents file. So, because I had this new course, right? And there's 4 videos in the course just about agents files. In fact, I'm about to make the 5th video on agents files. And you're probably thinking, well, Claude.md or agents.md, like what's so complicated? Why do you need 5 different videos that talk about these things? But that's because if you're trying to understand it across the ecosystem, there's a lot of nuance and there's a lot of differences in how the harnesses treat this file and where they put it and what they call it and how they ingest it and where they store it in context and whether or not they merge them if you have multiple versions and where you can keep multiple versions. Maybe you have a global, maybe you have a project-based one, maybe you have one in specific directories that are subdirectories. Maybe you have a local override that per project overrides that project, but just for you and not for the rest of your team. All of these things are possible depending on your harness. And I wanted to understand a little bit more of the nuances between the different harnesses and how they treat these files, how they manage them. Really, to me, these are just extensions of the system prompt because these agent files are meant to always stay in context, to always stay essentially in the memory of the model. And that means we want to keep them very specific and we want to keep them as small as possible so that they don't bloat our context too much. And we also want to understand exactly how our harness deals with them because some harnesses do things vastly different than others. Some will merge all the different files that it finds, whether it's global or project-based or local or override. Some of them will merge them, like Claude Code. Other harnesses will not merge them and will only pick the closest one they find, which means that it could be leaving off information. But the general consistent rule that all of them tend to obey is that they will find a file. Not all of them agree on the name of this file, but they will all find a file. They will store it in the context window, and they will ensure, even during compaction, that that file is always maintained in the context window. So when you run a /compact command, you generally don't want your Claude Markdown or your agents file. You don't want those to be squished or compacted. You want them to be in exactly as is, so that all of those rules that you gave the model are always inside of the conversation. And that's one of the benefits of using the Claude file or the agents file. I'm just going to say agents file from now on because they're all doing the same thing. Copilot, put something in a .copilot directory called Copilot instructions. Like there's different nuances. But one of the things that they've all started to do, actually that's not true. Not all of them do this. But one of the things they've all started, most of them have started to do, is give you a /init, which what that does generally is it creates the file if you don't have it, and it uses all the information it has in context to do that, or it updates the file with new information. And Claude was one of the early ones to do this. Now we have support in Codex, as well as OpenCode, as well as Copilot. Cursor does not have this init ability, and I don't know why they're leaving it out. But it doesn't really matter, because if you think of what this init is, we're just going to call this the init. It's kind of, you can kind of treat it like a project init. So this ability is really just a skill. And so one of the recommendations I have for people is if you want to micromanage exactly how this works, because as you can see here, this file is really about the differences. And what I did was I took the same project and I basically cloned the project 5 times. I should have just done work trees, but I made 5 copies, and then I ran through each harness and had that harness try to create the agents file. And then because it's the same project, they all were scanning the same things. So I gave them no additional instructions. I gave them just the built-in init command that came with them, and I got wildly different results. For example, in Codex, it created a 35-line file, but in Claude, it was the worst offender at 81 lines. Now, the interesting thing is that Claude is one of the apps that will limit how much it even reads of this Claude file. It will only read, I think it's the first 150 or I think it's only the first 200 lines. I can't remember exactly, but it will basically end a file at a certain point and not read anything else, which could be quite problematic the bigger your project gets. Not all of them do that. Some of them will just dump everything that you put in that file. Some of them will follow the ampersand, or some of them have different methods for following links for additional context, additional information. So for example, in Claude Code, you can say like @plan.markdown, and then Claude will go and pull that file in addition to the Claude file itself, which is pretty handy. I like to separate of concerns. I do like to put my plan inside of its own dedicated file, which is separate from my agent config. And my agent config is going to say things like always lint every time you edit code, and always use these linters, and always ensure that test-driven development is your focus when adding new functionality to my project, or always look for the latest version of a module before you add a new module to my Go project. I do those kinds of things in my agents file. Very literal, specific rules that I always or never want it to do. I say things like never run git commit, which you could technically put in to the harness config to block that command, but then agents tend to find ways around it. So I will also try to discourage it by putting in there, never run git commits or git adds. I will be the one to do that work. So it tends to follow my directions when I do that. At least the Claude models tend to do that. But you'll notice that OpenCode over here has 80 lines as well. So recently, OpenCode, and since they're open source, we can go look at what their init does. And I don't think I have a link in here, but if we do open code init, I think this is it, yeah. So OpenCode has their own file for this, and if you can look, it's in the OpenCode source under command, template, initialize. And I think it only even has 2 of these commands. And all this really is, to me, is a built-in skill, because it's just a long file. It's now 65 lines. Up until 2 months ago, this was only like 6 lines, but they enhanced it. So if you go back in time, a couple of months ago, they enhanced this and went from 6 lines of instructions down to 66. And it's got all sorts of good stuff around making sure that it goes and scans some sample of code to find the conventions that you use in your code and then document those. And then also go and look for other files that you can glean information from. And it's trying to guide the model to not go read every single file, to just go and find the important files for creating this agents file. Now, other people, their opinions are, you don't need all this. I've seen plenty of people telling me this on the internet, that you don't, with modern state-of-the-art models, you don't need this much hand-holding. You really don't even need a large agents file, and that you should start with a blank agents file and only add rules as you see the model make mistakes. If the model forgets to lint, put in a rule to tell it to always lint. If it forgets to check for the latest version of a module and it ends up installing some old code versions, you then make a new rule that says never do that again, always check for new versions by searching the internet or whatever. And so you apply this policy of, or this convention essentially, of making sure that the model doesn't hallucinate the same thing twice. That's a really good approach, and one that I recommend you always follow. But in this case, what we're saying is these are all these nuanced details of how to create the agents file or how to update the agents file. And I think it might even have, I'm not for sure, but yeah, I like this. When in doubt, omit. Stuff like that. So the point of me doing all this was just to show you how, I want to go back. That how different these different harnesses can be when it comes to even just basic things. So the way that I'm actually going to approach this is that once I've sort of tested some of these, and I don't know if the Claude init is better than the Codex init, or if it's better than the OpenCode, and I'm not sure if I'm ever going to know. I do know that the Codex one is definitely a smaller file. And so when I went through and looked at these different files, you can see here, behavioral insight, it says. Behavioral insight. Codex performed the most aggressive compression, an 83% reduction to just 35 lines. It stripped nearly all domain-specific context, like security checks, CLI behavior, and architecture, and replaced it with generic development boilerplate, comment conventions, testing guidelines that could apply to any Go project. So interesting, I read that, and this is the AI analyzing basically what the init created for Codex, which tells me I don't want to use the Codex one because I don't want generic advice. I want very specific things. I want things like, hey, if you're going to write Markdown, always use the Markdown linter. Hey, if you're going to write a GitHub Actions file in here, always use the action lint and the Zizmore linters because I want both, you know? If you're going to write me a GitHub action workflow, always add security permissions to every workflow file. You know, I'm going to want those things in my agents file. So what does it say for OpenCode? Behavioral insight. OpenCode kept more technical detail than Codex, but still condensed by 62%. It uniquely preserved and enhanced operational context, Docker private registry warnings, CLI workflow behaviors, and auth resolution, suggesting a bias towards runtime and operational knowledge over static architecture. I have not read these behavioral insights before. Okay, let's see what the Claude one says. Claude initially appeared to opt out by deleting the agents file, but on reinit, it created a Claude file because that's what it likes. It does not use or look at the agents file. Following its own platform-specific convention rather than the generic agents, the new file is lean at 81 lines with practical commands, architectural overview, and Docker/build instructions. Yeah, and then it says cursor. Cursor is the only harness that remains a pure deletion, no replacement file of any kind. Yeah, so cursor just doesn't do any of this stuff, so I'm not sure why cursor is so different and why they're not trying to behave similarly to the other. But they clearly know what they're doing, so I'm sure they got a reason. So yeah, now you know. So I think what I'm going to do is I might try to experiment with creating my own skill based on the open code text, and I'm going to call that agent file creator maybe, or project init. I'm not sure what I'm going to call it, but I'm going to try to use that. That way, regardless of which harness I'm using, I have a specific process that I care about. For example, I would probably want my instructions to highlight or enforce any security guidance or recommendations it finds in code or code comments. I probably would want it to focus on stuff like that, and making sure that it knows that it needs to be testing every time, writing tests, using linting through each edit, that kind of thing. Because to me, I had a project the other day actually that I realized even Opus on high kept finishing the conversation with listing out the linters, but it wasn't running them. It was just listing the fact that they existed. And so I asked it at one point after maybe 30 minutes of development, and I said, hey, are you actually running these linters that you keep telling me about? And it goes, oops, no, I've not been linting at all. Let me do that now. And then it took it 10 minutes to fix all the linting problems from the last 30 minutes of development. So if I had that in an init that I ran on project start and maybe did that as the first thing, it maybe would have not wasted my time there. That would have been a nice thing to do. Yeah, exactly. Commit lint, git leaks. Yeah, always run git leaks. I tend to do that stuff as GitHub action workflows, but it's good to have that kind of like linters. You don't want to have the damage happen too early and it not check it. So yeah, that's a good one. Trying to think what else. Check for any editor config so that if there's one that already exists, obey that. That generally is something that the higher end models tend to do. They tend to look around for things, files and config files and stuff like that, so that it knows to use those. But it's nice to enforce that stuff. And that way, in theory, not every time I see something that's missing from my agents file and I have to tell the agent to go add it, in theory, I could also tell it, please go also update that skill so that next time I run the skill, it ensures that these things are always added. And that's the way I approach my custom skills, is every time I use them, if they don't do exactly the most perfect thing, I tend to have the model update that skill with a fix so that the skill hopefully will be better next time. I think that's kind of how we're all using them. But my skills aren't public yet because I've only got a couple that I feel like are ready for me to share with people. But I do intend to actually make a GitHub Actions one. I know that there's probably a dozen that are already out there, but I do want to make my own because I'm very, very particular. I also have my own Docker file one that I want to make better. It's actually not that great, but I want to have it do things like always use Docker front ends, always add the Docker front end line in line 1 because that makes build kit better. Always use advanced functionality if possible to make the Docker file shorter and the builds faster. Stuff like that. Oh yeah, and if the project, I'm also starting to use Docker Bake, which recently got some new enhancements in the last couple of years. So I need to add that in there too, to say, if you're going to create a Docker file, always create a bake file and use that either with Compose or with a shell script or something like that. Always use the bake file when building, because that's much more reliable than using like a shell script or a make file. It's not necessarily more reliable. It's just more the Docker way to use a bake file. And if you're curious, the difference between a bake file and a compose file, to me, a compose file is largely used for development. So often when you're building an image through a compose file, it's often building the dev version. And for me, the bake file is how I would build the production version. The bake file is what I would send off to the GitHub action, so that the GitHub action builds the image the exact same time every time. And I can put a lot of cool things in the bake file, like how do I use tags? How many architectures do we build? That kind of stuff that is maybe you can still do in Compose. I'm pretty sure that it's a one-for-one feature parity, but you probably would have to end up with a different Compose file for building the production image. And then the question later is always, well, which one of these Compose files is the one I'm supposed to be using to build for production? So I've been leaning into bake files with more of my projects and using those out of the box to build my images. And I feel like that's a little bit better than putting all that stuff in GitHub Actions, because that's how I used to do it with GitHub Actions. I have a really, really advanced GitHub Action with all sorts of inputs that enable all sorts of things in BuildKit and the way I build it and the different tags that I want to use, because I don't just use one tag. I have like 3 or 4 different standards for how I have tags set, depending on whether it's a PR or is it a release. And then I also have different architectures that I build depending on the project. And I can really use the bake file for that. So anyway, these are all things that I would add into my Docker skill, so that when I say, hey, Dockerize this, ideally at the end of the day, it's going to create me a Compose file. It's going to create me a Docker file. It's going to create a Docker ignore, and it's going to create me a bake file, which I don't know if there's any other skills out there. Even Docker's own stuff, I don't think leans into creating bake files out of the box. So, all right. As I'm wrapping it up, any other questions in the comments there? Yeah. Robson saying, I've been using commit. It forces the agent fix it before committing anything. Commit lint. Okay. Yeah. Codex has the 200 line and last few line thing. Yeah. So yeah. Anyone using Cursor? I would say in my DevOps guild, the Agentic DevOps guild, we've got about 40 people in there, and they're at least half of them are using Claude Code, and then the next most popular is Copilot, and the third most popular is Cursor. But that means that probably only a couple of people are using Cursor, since I only have an audience there of a cohort of 40, so it's not a ton of people. And the people that use Cursor like it, and they like access to all the models. They like having one subscription with multiple models with different vendors. They like that choice. Obviously, Copilot does the same thing. Cursor. I recently saw a tweet that was very impressive that showed that Cursor, based on Swebench testing, that Cursor using Opus is better at passing the Swebench stuff than Claude Code itself with Opus or Claude models. And one of their arguments is that they tune the system prompt more so than Claude Code does. And they're really focused on the tool calling and the system prompt enhancements rather than worrying about the model choice. So that's interesting that they might actually be a better home. I think it was a pretty impressive leap. I don't know if it was like 10% improvement on Swebench. I can't remember where I saw that on Twitter, but it was a post from somebody. So I think there's a lot of good things you could say about Cursor. I just don't. It's not on my to-do list yet. That's not true. I tried to use the cursor CLI, but it broke. It wouldn't even install correctly through Brew on my machine. It actually gives a security warning because it's got some sort of signing problem that they haven't fixed yet. I've heard that other people don't have a problem with it, but for some reason on my system, it just won't run. And the other way to install it, which is through npm, I didn't want to install it that way. I wanted to install it through Brew. So I kind of gave up. Have I looked at the Obra superpower skill? It's a bit heavy, but is good to look at a bit as it suggests a development workflow inside these LLM coding tools. No, I haven't even heard of that one. Yeah. Plan via Q&A with the agent, review, plan some more, finalize, and then act. Okay, so we're talking about Obra superpowers. So superpowers. Oh, there we go. Brainstorming. Oh, is it? Oh, so there's multiple skills. It looks like. Well, it's quite popular. 180,000 stars. Okay. I'm gonna be checking it out. Great tip. Thanks, robot. All right. It's good seeing you all. I will see you next week. We've got a bunch of bookings happening, so we're gonna have some more. We got some new products on the show. I think we're gonna have a new Kubernetes distribution, essentially a new. I don't know if you want to call it a distribution, but yeah, we're gonna have that on the show. We have several guests that are coming up on the show pretty soon, so stay tuned on Thursdays. See you soon. Ciao.